When you picture the most dangerous woman in Mexico, what face comes to mind? You know the names: the Sinaloa Cartel, El Chapo, El Mayo, and their enforcement arm, Los Antrax. They were the most lethal hit squad in the entire Mexican drug war, notorious for torture, public beheadings, and leaving bodies hanging from bridges as a warning, with a body count that stained Sinaloa red. They were a killing machine so feared, rival cartel leaders wouldn't dare speak their name above a whisper. But consider this. What if, when the man who commanded that squad was finally captured, when a joint operation between the Mexican government and the DEA finally took down El Chino Antrax, the figure who allegedly took his place wasn't some battle-scarred sicario with a long kill list. It wasn't a general, nor was it a warlord. It was a 27-year-old woman from Culiacan, a mother of 3 kids, who held a nursing degree and commanded 294,000 followers on Instagram. This is Claudia Ochoa Félix, known throughout the narco underworld as La Emperatriz de los Antrax, the Empress of the Antrax. She brandished custom AK-47s plated in pink and gold. She posed for photos on private yachts and jets, with luxury designer handbags casually slung over her shoulder. In her home, she kept lions and leopards as house pets. She survived what was reported as at least one assassination attempt, where an unfortunate woman, mistaken for Claudia, was killed instead. She navigated the cartel underworld like a phantom. Her presence was always felt, yet her role was never officially confirmed, keeping her one step ahead of anyone who tried to pin down who she really was. To the Mexican government, she was just a social media personality. The cartels, however, called her the Empress. On the streets of Culiacan, they called her untouchable. Today, we delve into the complete story. The girl who was raised in one of the most violent cities in Mexico. The woman who married into the cartel's elite circle. The public figure who became known to the world as the Kim Kardashian of organized crime. And we investigate the mysterious night in September 2019 when her life abruptly ended inside a private home on an island in Culiacan. And we ask if that ending was as innocent as the official narrative claims. This is the legend of Claudia Berenice Ochoa Félix, alias La Emperatriz de los Antrax. Perhaps the most glamorous personality in the history of Mexican narco culture, and quite possibly the deadliest woman whose power no one could ever officially prove. Let's get into the story. Claudia Berenice Ochoa Félix was born on January 15, 1987, in Culiacan, Sinaloa. If you're not familiar with Culiacan, you need to understand the kind of city this is. While it's the capital of Sinaloa State, it is also the birthplace, the central headquarters, and the spiritual heartland of the most powerful drug trafficking organization in the world, the Sinaloa Cartel. This is the city that gave the world El Chapo, the city where El Mayo Zambada's own children were raised. This is a city where narco culture is not something you just see on the news. It is the water you drink, the air you breathe, and it's the reason conversations fall silent when certain names are mentioned at the dinner table. Claudia was raised in a neighborhood called Canaco, a middle-class residential section of the city. She didn't grow up in a shack or in poverty. She had a real home, a family, and what most would consider a normal childhood. She went to the Colegio de Bachilleres de Sinaloa for high school. Ambitious and driven, she even enrolled in nursing school after graduating. By every outward measure, she was on a perfectly conventional path. But in Culiacan, nothing is ever that simple. In a city where the cartel isn't some abstract story on television, but a part of your daily existence, where the most powerful men in the state are traffickers, and the most ostentatious displays of wealth are funded by drug money. The divide between civilian life and the cartel is razor thin, far more than outsiders could ever grasp. Crossing that line doesn't require some momentous decision. Sometimes, it only takes an introduction to a single person. For Claudia, that person was Juan Carlos Felix Gastelum, a man known in cartel circles simply as El Chavo Felix. And El Chavo was no street corner operator. He was a chief of security for the Sinaloa cartel. His responsibility was managing the protection details for the most powerful figures in the entire syndicate. But then, he made a power play that vaulted his status even higher. He married Teresita Zambada, one of the daughters of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the co-founder and most enduring leader of the Sinaloa cartel. That union made El Chavo Félix family, literal cartel royalty, and Claudia became his wife. They had 3 children together, embedding her deep within the inner sanctum of the most powerful criminal organization in the Western Hemisphere. She wasn't on the fringes. She wasn't a distant relative. She was living in the home of a man with a direct line to the figure who had run the Sinaloa cartel for decades alongside El Chapo. This was the world that defined Claudia Ochoa Félix as an adult. And just when she was at the center of it all, she met a man who would pull her even deeper into the abyss. His name was José Rodrigo Arechiga Gamboa. In Sinaloa, that name was legendary. Everyone knew him as El Chino Antrax. Born in 1980 in Culiacán, he came up on the same streets, in the same brutal culture, the same deadly orbit as Claudia. He was raised alongside El Mayo Zambada's own sons, forging childhood friendships that turned into a professional career when he began working as a bodyguard for Vicente Zambada Niebla, El Mayo's eldest. In 2008, the world shifted when the Sinaloa cartel's alliance with the Beltran Leyva organization fractured, transforming the drug business into an all-out military war. In that fire, El Chino Antrax forged a legacy that would dominate the next decade. He created Los Antrax, named for the deadly bacterium and engineered like an elite special forces unit. Los Antrax evolved into the Sinaloa cartel's most dreaded enforcement wing. They were the personal bodyguards and private hit squad for El Mayo Zambada himself. Their business wasn't just moving product, it was waging war. They tortured their rivals, hanging their bodies from bridges as a grotesque message. They launched raids that could leave dozens of people dead in a single afternoon. Their signature was a diamond-encrusted skull ring, a calling card left at the scene of the crime. El Chino Antrax commanded it all. And it was during this reign of terror that he and Claudia became romantically entangled. The specific timeline of their relationship, when it began, and who it overlapped with, is lost in the fog of that world, where nothing is ever clear. What is clear, however, is the result. Claudia Ochoa Félix found herself connected to 2 of the most powerful men inside the Sinaloa cartel's ecosystem at the exact same time. On one side was her ex-husband, El Chavo Félix, a man who had married into El Mayo's own family. On the other was El Chino Antrax, the man who commanded El Mayo's personal assassination squad. In the world she inhabited, that wasn't a scandal, that was a resume. Then came December 30th, 2013, the day the ground shifted beneath them all. El Chino Antrax deplaned from a KLM flight out of Mexico City at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport. He was traveling on a passport bearing the name Norberto Siqueiros Garcia, and his face had been dramatically altered by plastic surgery. He had even gone so far as to try to burn off his fingerprints, but it was all for nothing. U.S. law enforcement, operating through Interpol, had tracked him, used forensic techniques to confirm his identity, and they were waiting for him. Dutch police apprehended him right at the gate. Model. He was the architect of Los Antrax, the Sinaloa cartel's deadliest enforcement squad, and the personal shield for one of the planet's most hunted traffickers. But his reign didn't conclude in a hail of bullets on a remote Sinaloa mountainside. Instead, it unraveled quietly inside an airport terminal in the Netherlands. From there, he was put on a plane and sent straight to the United States, where he was processed into the federal system in San Diego, facing a slew of charges for conspiring to flood the streets with methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. By March of 2015, he had entered a guilty plea. The Antrax assassins were suddenly without their commander, and just months later, a story began to catch fire. A narrative that would forge Claudia Ochoa Félix's public persona, blazing through Mexican news outlets, British tabloids, and social media feeds across the globe. The Empress of the Antrax, they whispered, had seized control. By the year 2014, Claudia Ochoa Félix had become a sensation. Whether by her own design or as a carefully constructed myth is a question that remains unresolved. It all started with the photographs. Beginning in 2013, a collection of images surfaced online depicting Claudia in a lifestyle that seemed torn from a narco fantasy. There were private jets and yachts cutting through azure waters, driveways packed with sports cars, Ferraris, BMWs, Lamborghinis, and designer bags worth more than the annual salary of an average Culiacan citizen. In some pictures, she lounged with lions, in others with leopards. She could be seen relaxing by the pools of estates that rivaled five-star resorts. Then, in the very next shot from the same collection, she'd be clutching a gold-plated AK-47, its barrel aimed directly at the lens, her expression a mask of pure nonchalance. Her arsenal of accessories included rifles in pink, in gold, and in standard military camouflage. The firearms were a constant presence, and the woman holding them bore an uncanny resemblance to Kim Kardashian, not a passing similarity. It was unmistakable. The same flowing dark hair, the same facial structure, and the same curated image of dangerous glamour engineered for viral impact on social media. That comparison went global, and Mexican newspapers began running the story. Soon, international media followed suit, and the Kim Kardashian of organized crime became her new moniker, sitting alongside her other title, the Empress. But the narrative insisted she was more than just a pretty face with powerful friends. Sources from deep within the cartel world, along with the local grapevine that serves as Sinaloa's true source of news, all claimed that Claudia wasn't just posing with weapons for show. The rumor was she was actually calling the shots. In the wake of El Chino's capture, Los Antrax didn't crumble. The crew kept operating. Reports from British journalists, citing contacts within Mexican law enforcement, suggested that Claudia had stepped into a command position, orchestrating the unit's movements, managing the critical alliances that tied Los Antrax to El Mayo Zambada's vast criminal empire, and all the while leveraging her social media fame as a calculated act of public relations. The assassins, known for their diamond-encrusted skull rings, were still active. The jobs were still getting done. The cartel's primary muscle had not been weakened. The only thing that had shifted was the person giving the orders in Culiacan, and people began to say her name with the same hushed respect reserved for the top bosses, always in a low voice, and always with the unspoken knowledge that, in a city like this, a careless word could be a death sentence. This newfound power also allegedly painted a target on her back. In the months following El Chino's arrest, Mexican media sources claimed that killers had been sent for Claudia, but in a fatal error, they had taken out the wrong person. The victim was a woman who bore a striking resemblance to her, so close, in fact, that the hitmen were deceived, killing her in an attack meant for Claudia, and Claudia walked away unscathed. In the wake of the attack, her online presence absolutely exploded. She gained thousands of new fans, captivated by a cocktail of terror and allure. Normally, surviving a hit is your cue to disappear off the face of the earth. You lay low, you vanish completely. Not Claudia Ochoa Félix. She uploaded even more pictures. She even purchased a newspaper advertisement, insisting she was a legitimate entrepreneur with no connections to any criminal enterprise. In June of 2014, she called a press conference. She stood there with her brother and her own children by her side, reading from a pre-written script that denied any ownership of the social media profiles connecting her to Los Antrax. She claimed the photographs supposedly of her were of someone else entirely, and painted herself as the target of a smear campaign designed to endanger her life. It was the kind of audacious public display you attempt only under two conditions. Either you are completely clean, or you are so, certain of your security that a public denial becomes your most straightforward strategy. And in Culiacan, telling the difference between those two realities can be nearly impossible. But one thing was undeniable. By the close of 2014, Claudia Ochoa Félix had become an icon in Mexico's narco scene, her fame eclipsing that of most bona fide cartel chiefs on the world stage. She was captured on camera more often than capos who had been in the game for decades, and yet she remained totally free. No charges were ever filed. She was officially nothing more than a woman with a scandalous online persona and some very influential associates. The criminal underworld had never witnessed a figure like her before. To truly grasp what Claudia's life was like when her infamy was at its peak, you first need to picture the reality of life for Culiacan's cartel aristocracy. This was not a life of deprivation. They weren't cowering in bunkers or shuttling between safe houses in the dead of night. At its zenith, the Sinaloa cartel's empire stretched across 28 of Mexico's 32 states. It managed supply chains in 50 different countries and pulled in billions of dollars every single year. The individuals in charge were not living like wanted men. They lived like absolute kings. For them, the clubs of Culiacan, Mazatlan, and Guadalajara served as royal courts, their tables encircled by armed guards. They ordered bottles of liquor that cost more than the combined monthly income of every other person in the establishment. They frequented the finest restaurants, stayed in the most exclusive hotels, and took private jets from city to city, owning horses, ranches, and exotic animals you'd expect to find only in a zoo. And Claudia was right in the middle of this entire scene. A constant presence at the nightclubs favored by the cartel's inner circle, she was never seen without an entourage of armed men. The cameras were always on her. She perpetually embodied two personas at once, the glamorous socialite and the rumored criminal commander. Her Instagram feed was a virtual catalog of narco ambitions, a visual checklist of the lifestyle. One post shows her on a yacht just off the coastline. The next, she's on a private jet. In another, she strikes a pose with a customized firearm worth more than the average person's car. Yet, her photographs conveyed something deeper, a message that was carefully calculated. Those weapons were not just props. Within the narco world, flaunting your firepower is an explicit demonstration of authority. It is a declaration that says, "I have protection." It broadcasts, "I cannot be touched." It warns, "Anyone even considering making a move against me needs to see this picture and reconsider." So when Claudia brandished a pink AK-47 for her 294,000 followers, this was far more than a pop star's publicity shot. What she was really doing was broadcasting the strength of her security detail to anyone out there trying to gauge her vulnerability. And as for the social media accounts themselves, regardless of their origins, they served as a form of narco branding the underworld had never witnessed before. Los Antrax were already notorious for their diamond-encrusted skull rings and for the ballads they paid to have written about their brutal exploits. But Claudia gave the operation a face, a singular, unforgettable, and globally viral identity. The Empress wasn't just a figure of fear in Sinaloa. Her story was dissected in news reports across the United Kingdom, the United States, and Europe. The legend was growing. Then, reports began to surface that Claudia had established a life in Argentina, living for roughly 3 years in Nordelta, one of the most heavily guarded and exclusive communities in Buenos Aires. Rumors claim she maintained a constant security presence, had a private jet at her disposal, and even owned a polo ranch on the estate. She was living the opulent, secluded lifestyle that Mexico's ultra-rich seek in Argentina to escape the chaos back home. And the situation back home was becoming increasingly explosive. The Sinaloa organization was cracking apart, split by a generational war. El Chapo's own sons, known as Los Chapitos, were creating their own fentanyl empire, operating with more and more autonomy from El Mayo Zambada's old guard. The cartel, once a single, unified force, was transforming into something far more volatile. The loyalties that had once been a guarantee of survival were being rewritten by the minute. In that kind of environment, being the public, visible, international face of Los Antrax meant having a target on your back. And back in Culiacan, the same world that had catapulted her to fame was now closing in. One of her last public statements on social media made it perfectly clear where her allegiances really lay. In the months just before her death, she openly shared a photo of herself wearing a hoodie from the Chapo 701 brand, a clothing company established by Alejandrina Guzman, El Chapo's daughter, and even tagged Alejandrina to thank her for the item. A woman who publicly denied any ties to the cartel world was now thanking the daughter of the world's most infamous drug lord for cartel-branded clothing on her verified social media page. Whether it was an act of defiance, a tribute, or something else entirely, is a secret only Claudia took to her grave. The night is Friday, September 13th, 2019. Culiacan, Sinaloa. Claudia Ochoa Félix is 32 years old. She's a mother of 3. She is one of the most iconic figures in Mexican narco culture, and she is, against all odds, still alive. That night, she's at a gathering in the center of Culiacan, accompanied by a man officially identified only as a companion. a man whose name the authorities learned but deliberately withheld from the public. They were drinking heavily. The night proceeded the way nights do for people like Claudia and Culiacan, in protected spaces, surrounded by the kind of decadent luxury that only comes from knowing the right people. In the first light of Saturday morning, September 14th, she and her companion returned to a private residence in the Pontevedra neighborhood on Isla Musala, a secluded residential island within Culiacan, with access strictly limited to residents and their vetted guests. This was not a random choice of location. This was an address that required serious money and connections to even enter. They kept drinking. The night bled into morning. Then, at some point, Claudia became unresponsive. The companion tried to wake her up. She didn't move. He called the paramedics. When emergency responders finally gained access to the private home in Pontevedra on the morning of September 14th, in 2019, Claudia Ochoa Félix was declared dead on site. At just 32, her 3 children were suddenly left without a mother. The Attorney General's office for the state of Sinaloa wasted no time. Prosecutor Juan Jose Rios Estavo not only confirmed her passing, but immediately tackled the question burning through Culiacan. Was it murder? His response was blunt. The cause of death, he declared, was asphyxiation due to bronchoaspiration, a form of choking brought on by the consumption of alcohol and other intoxicants. This conclusion was backed by the autopsy from Sinaloa's Forensic Medical Service. Investigators received a statement from the man who had spent the entire night with her. Officials dismissed any possibility of a targeted killing. They saw no evidence of foul play. The official ruling was an overdose. Yet, in Culiacan, the official version of events is seldom the whole story. The intrigue didn't begin with the government's declaration. It began in the moments right after she died, when her social media profiles on Instagram and Twitter were abruptly locked down or wiped completely. This wasn't done by her family, nor was it the work of the platforms themselves. An unknown party was erasing her public footprint before the story had even gone wide. The suspicions mounted almost instantly. The initial narrative that spread through Culiacan's underground channels, through the blogs, the Borderland Beat forums, and the WhatsApp threads that deliver narco intel quicker than any formal news outlet, claimed the man with Claudia that night was more than just a friend. This account alleged he was an operative working for Los Chapitos, the sons of El Chapo, who at that moment were locked in a vicious internal war for control against the faction of the Sinaloa cartel led by El Mayo Zambada. Viewed through that lens, a woman with ties to Los Antrax, a group traditionally loyal to El Mayo's side, dying mysteriously while with a Chapitos operative doesn't look like a coincidence. It looks like a message. Then you have the failed hit on her life, just weeks before she died. News had surfaced in August of 2019 that Claudia had barely avoided being murdered. An assassin had shot and killed a woman who looked like her, only to discover later they had eliminated the wrong person. Claudia had escaped. She remained silent about the incident. Then, a mere 6 weeks later, she was found dead anyway, behind closed doors with an unknown man, inside a walled-off island enclave in Mexico's most cartel-dominated city. There was also the issue of what a finding of bronchoaspiration really implies in the real world. The officially stated cause, asphyxiating on vomit or other fluids while passed out from drugs and alcohol, is a medically recognized way to die from an overdose. But it is also, and this is the detail that the streets of Culiacan couldn't ignore, one of the neatest methods for disguising a homicide as a simple accident. No firearm is necessary, no knife is required. All you need is an unconscious person and a couple of minutes by yourself. The state's top prosecutor dismissed the possibility. An investigation was never launched. Charges were never brought. After giving his account, the companion was free to go. Her remains were released to her family. Her burial took place just south of Culiacan. Her online profiles were never reactivated. In her death, Claudia Ochoa Félix finally became something she could never truly be while alive. Confirmed. During her lifetime, she lived under a constant cloud of official denial. She would insist she was not a cartel leader. She denied being the head of Los Antrax. At her core, she was a woman from Culiacan, defined by scandalous Instagram posts, a famous look-alike face, and connections to men who wielded immense power. Her strategy was simple. Deny everything, deflect the accusations, and above all, survive. But when she died, the denials shattered. It wasn't an official investigation that broke the facade, but a tidal wave of public reaction that made her performance of innocence completely irrelevant. The narco underworld grieved for her publicly, setting social media ablaze. Her images went viral once more, no longer as boasts, but as memorials. The woman brandishing a pink AK-47, the woman posing on a private jet, the woman whose gaze challenged the camera, radiating an aura of absolute invincibility. In an instant, she was immortalized. And within hours of her death, a new name entered the narrative: Drake. For years, followers had fueled rumors of a connection, circulating claims that the Canadian rapper and the so-called Empress of Anthrax were not just following each other, but exchanging private messages. The theory was that Drake, known for his attraction to a specific mix of danger and glamour, had been captivated by Claudia's world. Her death made the rumor explode. His name trended globally right next to hers. He never confirmed the connection. He never issued a denial. The legend took root in that void of silence, the very same space where all narco myths are born. And then, the body count began to rise among those closest to her. First, El Chino Anthrax. He was the founder of Los Anthrax, the figure at the very heart of Claudia's saga. In March of 2020, he was released from a U.S. federal prison to house arrest. He had completed a 7-year sentence. The word on the street was that he had cooperated, trading information on his former cartel associates to U.S. law enforcement. On May 9, 2020, less than 2 months after walking free, his probation officer flagged him as missing. On May 15, 2020, his body was discovered in Sinaloa, riddled with bullets. He had been wrapped in cloth. His head was sealed in a black plastic bag. They found him inside a deserted SUV on a dusty road east of Culiacan, the city that had birthed him, the city where he forged his empire, the city that once trembled at his name. He was not alone in the vehicle. His sister and her husband lay dead beside him. The verdict was clear: abduction, torture, and execution for all three. The message was unmistakable. He returned to Sinaloa after talking to the Americans, and for that betrayal, the cartel delivered its sentence. And just like that, the two pivotal characters in Claudia's story were gone, both dead between 2019 and 2020, both consumed by the violent world that made them famous. So what does the story of Claudia Ochoa Félix truly reveal? Beneath the veneer of glamour, the assault rifle photos, and the Kim Kardashian comparisons, she personified the collision of two worlds the cartel had never seen merge before. The old guard narco power structure, built on strategic family marriages, unbreakable networks of loyalty, and brutal enforcement squads, colliding with the new reality of social media, where image itself was a potent, entirely different form of power. She didn't just operate within the narco world, she curated it, she packaged it, and she broadcasted it for mass consumption. Through her, Los Anthrax achieved a level of global infamy that no DEA press conference or gritty documentary could ever hope to match. Was she a genuine commander calling the shots? Or was she simply reflecting the power of the men who did? Or was she perhaps both at once? That last option is likely the most accurate. She grasped something fundamental about the era she inhabited that most of the men in her orbit completely missed. In 2014, your follower count was currency. Your visibility was a shield. Being the public face of Mexico's most feared death squad meant that making you disappear would come with a very steep price. For a time, that brutal calculation was what kept her breathing. And then, at 32 years old, in a private residence on an island, in Culiacan one Saturday morning in September of 2019, it stopped working. 3 children were left without a mother. An icon's body was gone, and Culiacan had another ghost to add to its collection. The narco underworld is filled with men whose lives conclude in fiery wrecks, roadside ditches, and military strikes that are news for a single day and then vanish from memory. Claudia Ochoa Félix's story concluded in a private bedroom, with the official cause listed as alcohol and drugs, surrounded by questions that nobody in a position of power cared to investigate. Which of those endings carries more mystery? The ditch by the road or the silent bedroom? The roar of guns or the deafening quiet? In Culiacan, the answer is already understood. Claudia Ochoa. Félix transformed from a nursing student in Culiacan into the most photographed woman in the history of the Mexican narco trade. Her story began simply. A girl from a middle-class neighborhood who happened to marry into the wrong family. Her story ended with her as La Imperatriz, a legend, a specter, and an enigma. All of it wrapped in designer fashion and armed with a gold-plated rifle. She never went on the record to admit to anything. She never faced a single charge. She was never officially anything more than a social media figure with influential friends and a portfolio of controversial images. And yet, the two men most crucial to her narrative, El Chino Antrax and the empire he engineered, are both gone. The cartel that propelled her to fame has since shattered into a civil war. The existence that appeared so untouchable to outsiders was ultimately stamped with the same expiration date as every other life in that brutal world. Claudia just made the path to the end look far more beautiful. Behind the glamour, the weapons, and the social media fame lies a truth far less seductive, one built on fear, instability, and irreversible consequences. Stories like this remind us that the illusion of power can be dangerously misleading. What looks like control is often just survival in a system where loyalty is temporary and betrayal is inevitable. The real cost isn't measured in money or status, but in lost freedom, fractured families, and lives cut short. Every decision made in pursuit of fast power or recognition can quietly close doors that may never reopen. And for many, by the time they realize the trap, it's already too late. This is a powerful reminder that the choices we make, especially under pressure or temptation, shape the direction of our lives in ways we can't always predict. Strength isn't found in dominance or fear, but in walking away from paths that promise everything while taking even more in return. In the end, true success is not about being feared or envied. It's about building something that lasts, something rooted in integrity, safety, and purpose. Because the most dangerous illusion of all is believing you can escape the consequences of the life you choose.